Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi Vikki, it's great to have you here today. For people who don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I am Professor Vikki McCall, and I'm a Professor of Social Policy at the University of Stirling, and I'm also the Creative Director of Socialudo.
So tell us a bit about your background. Tell us how you got into doing this.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very passionate about housing and ageing in particular, and making sure that we are future-proofing our society for the ageing population. I think I worry a lot that we've had an ageing demographic for quite some time at the global level and at the UK level. And I think everybody knows the statistics around that. And yet, even today, there are people in homes that are not supporting them at all. They're inappropriate homes. And the outcomes are people aren't able to bathe or aren't able to sleep, or they're sitting in cold homes. So I suppose I want to make sure that the housing sector, which has been accused of being woefully underprepared for this, is ready for the inevitable ageing population.
And it's a massive issue, isn't it? And like you say, it's not talked about at all. A
Mm.
quarter as much as it should be, really, I think, on all different levels, as well as housing, isn't it? When we were talking before when we were arranging the podcast, you mentioned something about housing stigma, and that kind of got my interest, and it's something you've always been interested in. You were saying it's something that's of a big importance to you. Would you just explain what housing stigma is for people? Because I'm not sure if it's something people are familiar with.
Happy to. It's a very powerful process that is sometimes very invisible and unconscious in our society. And when I'm talking about future-proofing society, I'm wanting to do it in the framework of how we tackle inequalities and how we tackle stigma that might be related to, for example, aging and ageism, or stigma that's tackled to disability and discrimination around that. But in the housing sector in particular, stigma is really interesting in terms of its process, and you'll find that it's often talked about under the banner of urban stigmatization. So these are often sometimes areas, and then people that live in those areas that might be labeled as problematic, and I use this way, problem places, problem people, and that is usually our more multi-deprived areas, you know, on the index of multiple deprivation, those red areas. But I suppose, Lisa, I'm very passionate about it because I lived in one of these problematic areas growing up in social housing for a while. And the reality of living in these communities is very different to the perception. They're really strong communities and people are very proud of being from them. But often because of that process of stigmatization, the people and the areas can be written off. And I want to tackle that as well. And that snowballs that stigma often to maybe housing tenure around social housing. And I know that some sheltered housing, etc., and housing for older people can also be stigmatized because of that overlap of stigma around aging and disability as well. And the heartbreaking part of it is when people are treated badly and they think that's just the way it is and they accept that as the norm. And I definitely want to tackle that.
Yeah, absolutely. Would that also encompass the challenges we have sometimes when we are trying to house someone maybe with more complex learning disabilities, and the neighbours are all like, oh, we don't want people like that in this area, we don't want someone like that living next door, or we have the challenges at the moment of trying to get planning permission for children's homes, oh, we don't want that here, and all the neighbours kicking off a fuss and complaining about it. Does that fall into that same category, do you feel?
Definitely applied to different groups. All of the ones you mentioned, I think one of the most common as well is connected to mental health. And we see a lot of stigma connected to dementia as well,
Yeah.
for example. And it's an interesting phenomenon. We see often this idea that people are passing along stigma and reproducing stigma, often as a defense mechanism. So it's like, oh, well, I'm a little bit disabled and I might use this, but they're more disabled over there. They're the problem. And it's part of that divisiveness we have in society, reproduction of the inequalities that we see. And unfortunately, it's very, very powerful. And I don't think housing in the past ever thinks it's got a role to play, but it definitely does.
And how do we overcome that? If I tell you, I've just finished an interview with another podcast guest, and she was talking about these challenges with neighbours in housing people with learning disabilities. And this housing association had done some amazing work with the neighbours, to the point the neighbours actually put balloons out and did a really lovely welcome greeting for this young person when they moved into their home. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. How do we replicate that? How do we do that in other areas? And that's a real challenge, isn't it? How do we overcome this? What do we do?
I think it's a real challenge, and I think some of the solutions of which we apply is really formalising and integrating processes of co-production. And it's all about understanding the stories of others, building empathy, professionalism, and solidarity in the housing sector with different groups, and blowing out of the water those perceptions, which we know don't mirror reality, but somehow stay out there and add to that stigmatizing process. I think one of the other solutions is future-proofing, is getting people to get around the table all together and think about how do we plan for the future in a strategic way and support all groups, and see it as a system, not as an individual, make it less of a private issue, more of a public issue.
And I guess that sounds great in theory, doesn't it? But the reality of angry mobs that you get in some areas, where people, whip up a hate campaign against somebody and decide that they do not want this person, and often, not always, but often it's in areas where maybe there are lower areas of education, and empathy seems to be really hard to get through, perhaps potentially because of the kind of mob mentality that's kind of built up around it. Anger and fear, I guess it comes from, doesn't it?
Anger and fear, not a good combination. And I feel that social media has a big role in this as well, in that we're all stuck in our algorithms. We're all hearing ourselves echo back, and maybe that becomes more divisive. And we do need to tackle that and make sure that that people are connecting, and we're supporting communities in really proactive ways. And I think especially with planning for aging and planning for disability, that's about being inclusive in our environments, and tackling exclusive design, and making sure all groups are part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it very much, in some parts of society, disability is so hidden, isn't it? Because it's so hard to access services and stuff if you aren't fully able-bodied, that actually people don't always see people with disability or meet people. So it's very easy to other people, isn't it, I guess?
That process of othering is absolutely the case when it comes to aging. And we've found that people really find it difficult to personalize aging. Aging is always happening to somebody else. And our research is always saying, well, it's older is always 10 or 15 years older than you, whatever age you are. And I've interviewed 93-year-olds, and older is down the corridor.
Yeah, definitely. I said my mum, who's nearly 80. Oh, look at that old person over there. Yeah.
Very difficult to personalize.
Mm.
And then that's why we started the gaming elements, to try and create that safe space for people to understand these intangible challenges like aging and disability, personalize them as something that's connected to them, and that they can do something about them on a personal level and a professional level.
So tell us more about that. Can you tell us what that is?
Absolutely. I have, so in my background, I've popped it up to try and give a visual of what we do. And what happened in 2017, we did a project led by the University of Stirling. And we brought in policymakers, service providers, and just the community, older people themselves, and co-produced a tool. And it was this phenomenal board game called Hope Town, because the glass half full. And playing it with hundreds of people made us realize we had something really magical here when you get the right people in the room together, sharing their experiences. And that gave us a good excuse to go around and play board games with people as well, which is fun. But it was a really powerful research tool as well. It helped us gather really interesting insights and data from different expertise in a non-standard way. It's not an interview, it's not a focus group. You're getting people to make decisions, and you're also getting them to face the consequences of those decisions by playing into the future through the board game. And then COVID happened, Lisa, and nobody wanted to do board games with us, which is perhaps understandable. And then we came out of that, and the project was all finished, and we thought, we can't let this amazing method, this idea go to waste and get the report go dusty on the shelf. So we created Socialudo, which delivers now at kind of serious games, bespoke personalized experiences for people that brings lots of different challenges alive, whether it's aging or energy efficiency as well, or adaptations, or or technology. It's just a way of getting the right people in the room together, give them something tangible to play through, and mechanisms to create a safe space to personalize those challenges on the personal level, and also in the kind of service level and professional level.
So give some examples of the kind of thing that when you would use this, when would it be used?
So we designed it to help with, say, boards, strategic board away days, staff away days, tenant scrutiny panels, you know, getting organisation. It was definitely on the housing side where we started. But who's really taken it on board has also been health and social care partnerships as well, because I think fundamentally our whole ethos is partnership working is where the magic happens. So if you're all coming together, you all own a different part of the system: health, housing, social care, but really we all need to work together to improve well-being and work towards the outcomes that we want, quality of life, etc. And Hopetown was designed as the kind of flagship game. We've got lots of games now, but Hopetown was the flagship game that focused on that, bringing housing, health and social care together. And then you split them into teams: policymakers, service providers, developers, and the community, and you give people the job that's not their day job.
So this would be normal people would be given, right, you're suddenly responsible for health or something. Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
So you're looking for that paradigm shift. You're looking for that change in thinking, and that step back to see the system, not just your part of it, where you are rather understandably defensive because you're always fighting budget cuts, you're always fighting and dealing with what we call the immediate chaos, you know, which is like whack-a-mole, isn't it? Oh, I've solved one thing and another pops up. So you never get time to play to the future. You never get to think strategically, and we need to think strategically if we're looking at this era of aging and climate change. But if you're playing a game, you can play out that conflict in a way, but in a safe way, because it's a game. So it's a serious topic, but you are allowed to have fun and play it. And if I've reduced the budget in turn 2, it's interesting how people cope with that. What do they prioritize? In the next round, say, we'll add more people to the game because it's an aging population. And maybe in the next round, we'll add more people with dementia or disability and things like this. And then people are like, wait a minute, I am faced with the consequences of what I decided at the start. Is there enough housing? Is there enough care? Is there enough hospitals? You know, all of these things. But in a safe way that helps you understand not only your own role, but your place within it, your positionality within the system as well.
And so what is the kind of impact that you're having from this? What kind of, you know, what real life, you know, when it sounds really interesting. It sounds fun as well, which is quite rare, isn't it, in some of these roles?
Absolutely. So we were really lucky post-COVID. The Dunhill Medical Trust were very interested in our methodology, and they said, could we pilot this? And Sky, the Social Care Institute for Excellence, they led this with our partners, the United St Saviour's charity in Southwark. So we piloted it there, and we did a big, I like to call them mega games as well. That sounds quite epic. Bringing all the partners in Southwark together, you know, from the third sector to Southwark Council to the health and social care partnerships, Partnership Southwark. And we put them all in the same room together. And many of them hadn't met each other, you know, even though it's just one part of London, a big part of London, to be fair. And we said, right, let's do this. Let's come together and see what our shared priorities are. And we played the game, and everybody loved it. Really, it's very different in terms of, you know, organizational development opportunities as well. And people were playing and swapping their email addresses, and it's like, oh, is that what you do? That's wonderful. And we produced the report of the shared recommendations and the data. And in one of the report recommendations, it was we recommend you have a strategy for older people's housing in the region. And they're taking that forward. The housing part of Southwark Council is actually taking that forward as we speak. So it's phenomenal. And they're using that network we started in the game, that ground zero part, to then carry on with that network and hopefully develop that strategy and implement it in the region and help people on the ground.
Fantastic. That's really amazing, isn't it, to see that coming to life. Are there other examples of times that you can use it outside of sort of a very pure housing kind of model, or is it always around housing?
No, not at all. The Health and Social Care Partnership elements and ADAS and the Northern Housing Consortium came together, as well as the NHS in the North East and North Cumbria region, asked us to come to Newcastle, and we were helping to connect 14 local authorities in that area and explore opportunities for joint working in terms of supporting an older population, but also thinking about how we tackle damp and mouldy homes and its effect on health. And all of, because these things are very interconnected, Lisa, and sometimes taken as separate, but they're not really separate. You know, housing and health and social care need integrated and connected solutions.
It's very easy for people to be quite siloed, isn't it, and work in their own little areas and not be able to see the bigger picture sometimes.
Yeah, and serious gaming really helps with that bigger picture in a really safe and creative space and innovative space, and gives people a little bit of it's like relax, it's like permission to step back, stop the emails, get out of your screen, and let's think creatively and strategically and give them permission to do that, which not everybody lets themselves have. It's dealing with the immediate chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're firefighting all day, it's very hard, isn't it, to think bigger picture, I guess. That's really challenging, isn't it? And do you involve service users in this as well? Is, you know, clients, service users, whatever word you want to use, are they part of these games too?
They can be very central to it, especially if people are using it as a co-productive tool. What we do predominantly is weave in real stories and real narratives to all of our games. And this is really important because it brings it to life for people and shows the reality of lived experience and co-production. And people are sometimes quite surprised by the situations people are in. We're just about to go, for example, to play this game in Belfast for the homelessness network there. And the narratives will be using their homeless narratives, and even just reading them, these were given to us as lived experience from their lived experience panels, and just reading them was heartbreaking. So you're making people play that through and become their reality, maybe as avatars or vignettes in the games. And I think that's really powerful. Stories can be very powerful in trying to help people show the reality or understand the reality of people on the ground.
It says a lot more, doesn't it, than statistics often. It affect, you know, we're all affected
You
by
always need a
storytelling
bit
as
of
well.
both.
Yeah, yeah, of course. With the homelessness, what's what they're trying to achieve there? What, or is it just bringing different parties together again for that one?
At the moment, it's for a kind of conference element at the moment. But one of the really interesting recent ones we've done was working with South Ayrshire and bringing the housing, health and social care elements together for that region as well. Very much connected to their quite innovative and really interesting aging well strategy there also. So it's about trying to find that umbrella of connection. And the findings from that were about trying to get everybody on board for how do we plan for prevention. And I won't need to tell you, Lisa, that that's still a hard sell.
It's really difficult prevention, isn't it? It's always very poorly funded and poorly appreciated.
Mm.
Yeah, it's such an important role, but it's just, yeah, it's not. Yeah, I was a health visitor for a long time. Health visiting is getting so little funding now, but I'm not going to start my health visiting rant. But it's the same thing, isn't it? You can't get funding for something that will make an impact to the next generation very easily.
Yeah, but we really need to.
Yeah,
We really need
yeah. Long-term, big picture thinking is where we need to be going. But for housing, especially because you can't just suddenly create homes, can you? You know, in a year, this needs 20, 30-year strategy to meet needs. Yeah. Yeah.
So the co-founder of Socialudo is Professor Alasdair Rutherford, and he's the economist. So I do the stories and he does the numbers. And when you look at the projections of what we're seeing, that really brings it to life of why we have to break down these barriers. And obviously gaming is just one methodology to do that. But I think coming together, we do show the potential of where new ideas can take us, rather than just doing what we've always done, because that's not going to work as our health needs are changing, as we don't have enough housing that supports us as we grow older, as health and social care have a kind of crisis. I mean, we've just declared, lots of areas up here in Scotland have just declared housing emergencies. We do need to think outside box. We do need different ways of working, and we need to prioritize this idea that we're all stakeholders in aging. I want to be in a home that's going to support me as I grow older as well. It's the one thing we all have in common.
It really is, absolutely. Thank you so much, Vikki, for explaining. That was really helpful. And we'll put your contact details in the show notes so people can contact you, and we'll put some more information there as well if people are interested in finding out more. So
Oh,
thank you,
thank you.
Vikki.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Thank you.